Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Monday, September 23rd, 2013, start of a brand new week. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about here today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Little program note, on Friday in our third hour, normally Claire would be there, but Claire's off working on another project. We're going to have Michelle Rosen. We're coming up on the anniversary of the Tylenol killings, and it is becoming more and more apparent that the official story was a lie to protect corporate interests. And Michelle's done a lot of work. She's got a book out on it. The FBI is supposed to be releasing some new information coincident with the anniversary. So far, though, it hasn't happened. We're going to be getting an update with Michelle on Friday. Now, obviously, the big news over the weekend, there was a terror attack, registered trademark Mossad, at a shopping mall, Israeli-owned, in Nairobi, Kenya. And the good news is all of the Israelis got out. And Israeli forces are there in charge of the situation. And this thing reeks of false flag, because Kenya is not Israel. And Israeli authorities really don't have jurisdiction there. But they swooped in. They were all around the airport fire at Kenya. Now they're all over the shopping mall, and they're basically in control. The Kenyan government is saying, yeah, these Israeli experts, they're taking the point on making sure that nobody comes out of there alive who doesn't support the official story. And we're seeing all these stories from all over the place about how everything that's happening there in Nairobi, it's Israelis in charge of this, Israelis in charge of that. And this reeks of being an Israeli false flag attack to demonize Muslims, just as Netanyahu pushes for war with Iran. You've got to go kill all them evil Muslims for us. Yet again, apparently AIPAC is in the fray, once again screaming that we, the United States, have to be prepared to use force against Iran. And I don't know about you, but I'm getting sick and tired of Israel always telling Americans to go kill Israel's enemies, because Israel is making enemies faster than the United States can kill them. It's a failed policy. So this standoff in the mall is continuing, and it's just getting a lot of coverage and a lot of drama. And to me, it's a replay of the Levant affair, where Israel carried out terror attacks in Egypt and planted false evidence to frame the Egyptian Muslims, or the hijacking which led to the raid on Entebbe, which British intelligence revealed was actually set up by the Israeli intelligence service Shin Bet, again with an agenda to demonize Muslims and build sympathy for Israel, so that the world would say, yeah, go ahead and slap those Palestinians around. They deserve it. They're all evil people. And again, the timing is not a coincidence, as Netanyahu travels to the United Nations to scream about how the U.S. has to start bombing Iran. Inevitably, we're going to get a flurry of these so-called terror attacks that make the Muslims look bad and Israel look good. It's inevitable at this point. We see this coming out. We're going to grab a quick phone call here. Andy in Utah. Aloha, Andy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, the show's on my mind. I'm so glad you're there. I called a week ago. I sent you a post on the, similarities and all the comments by all the senators in a, I think, 2.5-minute period. And then I posted for my over 2,000 friends the Bamboozer, what really happened live link. Mm-hmm. And shortly thereafter, shut down, just totally shut down from Facebook. And they gave me a warning, and that you unsolicited friendship requests, something like that, bothered me for years. And
you mean Facebook doesn't like me? I'm shocked.
Oh, absolutely. So I just come up to the area, the first person I've talked to since I worked again, since it was last week at this time I called. Now, they're not letting me, add new friends. I'm fond of your audience, when they post things. I love them. They're the smartest people on the planet. So I'll go in, like your posts this morning. There's 5 folks that post your Facebook. My God, that's brilliant stuff. And if anybody's missing it, they're missing the very best, cutting edge. Everyone, they're talking about things going on in China today that no one else is. And for example, so I'll go in and I'll request a friendship after I notice somebody like that, and there are a lot of them. And so I build up a lot of friends on Facebook that way, just your friends,
Mm-hmm.
To where we have a lot of shared friends. Well, they're not letting me anymore. So this morning, I figure, well, what am I going to do now? I want to be these guys' friends, that gal that just posted the China story. So instead, now I just made a comment on her post and said, hey, lovely post, love your mind. Would you please add me to your friend? And that's how I'm getting around it. Hopefully it'll work. If anybody else gets it, maybe that's the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I want to donate to you in the show a piece of music I wrote. I own it. It's mine. It's on, and I just sent it to you on there's a YouTube link to it. I had written this. It may be too stuffy for your show, but go ahead and listen to it. I'm the one on the piano. I had written this for the Sheriff Richard Mack campaign for governor of Utah years ago,
mm-hmm.
and we performed it in Salt Lake the very day he was in Hawaii with you.
Ah, okay.
His daughter. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I had a Freedom concert, me and a tenor here locally a couple of years ago, and I pulled it back out, and it's there on YouTube. You can go ahead and use that music if you need it.
I'll take a listen. I saw the email come in. I didn't really have time to listen to it, but I'll make a point of it after the radio show today. Okay?
Yeah, just, if they shoot you down, man, I stand up and give them twice as much or more.
It's the only way to do it. It's the only way to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm not surprised that we're seeing interference with friends' requests on Facebook. Apparently, Facebook just deleted the Facebook page for that national truckers strike that was being called. The page just vanished, disappeared without explanation. So, yeah, they're definitely getting afraid out there. They're definitely getting afraid. All right, Andy, going to let you go here. I want to get back onto the situation in Kenya because it's looking to me there are so many bogus things about this. It feels to me like it's a prequel. Now, remember, before 9/11, there was a bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Kenya. That was sort of the run-up. Oh, Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, he bombed the Kenyan embassy, so we've got to watch out for him before he does something really bad in the United States, which, of course, happened on 9/11. I'm not the only person having doubts on this thing. There's an article over on the Rebel.org about that stupid Muslims killing all Christians at a mall story, pointing out that the mall is owned by Israelis. The SWAT team that showed up was from the Mossad. And just saying, it stands to reason this is another staged, orchestrated piece of theater to try and get the world hating the Muslims one more time. And history would bear that out. Now, probably if you're my age, you remember the name of a guy named Abu Nidal, who was supposed to be a Palestinian terrorist, and he just went on for a long time with dozens and dozens of bombings and assassinations, including he was the supposed mastermind of the Munich massacre at the 1972 Olympic Games. Yet all of his actions were harmful to the Palestinians' political ambitions because everything he did made the Palestinians and Muslims look bad and built sympathy for Israel. And Yasser Arafat wanted nothing to do with him, and ultimately it came out where even his own close associates were convinced that Abu Nidal was actually working for the Mossad. Now, remember what I said about terror. Nobody who is genuinely seeking sociopolitical change carries out acts that destroy popular support for their cause. You didn't see George Washington or Thomas Jefferson attacking colonial schools and churches during their campaign to force out the British. It would not work. Yet everything Abu Nidal did demonized Palestinians and built global sympathy for Israel. And so it's hardly surprising, looking back, that Abu Nidal's own people concluded that he must have been working for the Israelis. They're great at infiltrating and putting people into their rival organizations and then getting them to carry out attacks that make that organization look bad. Just like when the FBI infiltrated the anti-war movement and staged that riot at Disneyland to demonize the anti-war movement. It's an old trick. We'll be right back with some more examples from history. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. So we're going back and we're looking at cases in history where terror attacks were not as they were presented to you. And back in 1976, there was a hijacking of an aircraft that was diverted to the Entebbe airport in Uganda, and Idi Amin got involved to air his small grandeur, and it was resolved with a supposedly daring raid by Israel, which they even made into a movie, the raid on Entebbe, and Charles Bronson's out there looking heroic, and the Israelis look good, and oh, those mean old Palestinians, how bad they are. British intelligence actually released some documents not too long ago that said that Israel actually set the hijacking up with Shin Bet infiltrators into the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. And it was done with one simple agenda: make the Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims look bad, make the Israelis look good, to give Israel political room to go on grabbing pieces of other people's countries and dispossessing the Palestinians of their homes. That's been the agenda all along. Make the Palestinians look bad by hook or by crook so that Israel can, with the blessing of the rest of the world, take their land away from them. Now, of course, a very famous case of Israel doing this, and one that they botched, was the Lavon affair. This was back in 1954 in Egypt, where Israeli agents were planting bombs in buildings, including a United States diplomatic facility, and planted evidence framing Egyptian Muslims as the culprit. It's, again, make the Muslims look bad, make, Israel everybody's friend and so forth. And the plot failed because one of the bombs detonated prematurely, and the Egyptian authorities captured the bomber, who turned out to be an Israeli agent who led them to round up the rest of the Israeli spy ring operating in Egypt. And some of these were Israeli nationals, others were Zionim recruited from the local Jewish population. And of course Israel said, oh, it's a hoax, it's the anti-Semites. And then finally they were forced to admit that, yeah, you caught us, we were blowing things up and framing the Muslims, and we promise we won't do it again. And of course there was Israel's attack on the USS Liberty. And as Israel was attacking and trying to sink the USS Liberty, Israel was out there screaming, the Egyptians are doing it, the Egyptians are doing it, go bomb them, hurt them. And there was a nuclear-armed strike in preparation for an attack on Cairo when the crew of the USS Liberty finally got a radio message out saying, hey, these are Israelis that are attacking us. And then, of course, everybody went back to, oh, the weather was cloudy, it was foggy, nobody could see anything. And, of course, it was just more of that same nonsense. So, we're seeing all these stories here that just don't seem to make a lot of sense. Israeli assets, all of the Israelis are safely removed. Israeli troops are on the ground. They're taking control of the situation. They're trying to control the outcome. They're trying to make sure that nobody leaves that mall alive who might contradict the official story. And the very nature of this attack, where they're going in there screaming, we only want to kill non-Muslims, it's like they're playing to newspaper headlines. So that Washington can say, see, we need to attack Kenya now. Interesting story broke just before we went to air here, where supposedly the leader of this raid has been identified as a British national. She's nicknamed the White Widow. She came into being following the London 772 bombing, which we know was another false flag hoax. And supposedly this woman, Samantha Luthwaite, there's a Muslim-sounding name for you, has become a terrorist to avenge her husband who was killed in this this false flag bombing. So let's see. Story coming out of Democracy Now, quoting an article out of Christian Science Monitor, saying that this idea that this Al-Ittihad was behind the bombing doesn't really add up, because they're not known for blowing themselves up. The facts aren't lining up. And this Al-Ittihad has not actually carried out any terror attacks since 1997. And they've never targeted Western powers, the U.S. or its allies. So even over at the Christian Science Monitor, the official frame-up is already crumbling apart here. Story coming out of antiwar.com identifying 6 Americans among the Nairobi mall attackers. And it starts out saying that Al-Shabaab, which, by the way, is a generic word meaning young people, just like up in Afghanistan, the Taliban, the evil Taliban. Well, Taliban simply means students. It's not an organization. It's a social category. These are students. Al-Shabaab means young people, young, unmarried, just living their lives. It's not an organized group. But supposedly this Al-Shabaab, or somebody claiming to be their spokesman, released the names of the attackers at this mall. And the names included 6 Americans, 2 from Minnesota, 1 from Kansas City, 1 from Maine, Illinois, and Arizona. Now, why on earth would Al-Shabaab release the names of the attackers? Unless they're playing to the propaganda headlines here. I mean, after all, did Al-Qaeda release the names of the 9/11 hijackers? This is feeling like a propaganda run-up. And if you look at statements made by Representative Peter King over the weekend, where he's saying, oh, the threat is here in America, they came from America. Even before this supposed Al-Shabaab announcement, Peter King was saying, oh, yes, we know at least 50 of these attackers came from the United States. They're already selling terror threat here in the United States of America. This is feeling like a prequel to a major false flag attack here in the U.S. Remember, again, the U.S. Embassy in Kenya was bombed just weeks before 9/11. To sort of plant the idea, terror, Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda. And we've all been hearing about these preparations for some kind of a major FEMA operation in Region 3, the first part of October. So, just goes on here. Let's see. Yeah, New York Representative Peter King, terrorist group recruited Somali Americans. And again, going back to 9/11, remember before the buildings had even collapsed, all the corporate media was saying, oh yes, it's Osama bin Laden, it's Al-Qaeda, it's Osama bin Laden, just pounding on that thing. And Representative King is out there over the weekend saying they recruited Somali Americans. He couldn't actually know unless he's following a script. So this is already feeling like a false flag run-up on this whole situation. Oh, let's see. Now, for those who believe the official story, that this is a bunch of Somalis who attacked Kenya because Kenya's been attacking Somalia, if that's true, the blame rests right on the United States-AFRICOM collaboration because the U.S. encouraged Kenya to attack Somalia. So if you believe the official story, this is not an attack, it's a reprisal for a U.S.-backed invasion of their territory. Oh, my goodness here. By the way, little side note, just in case you were wondering, apparently Kenya just recently discovered major oil deposits in their Turkana region. So, of course, the United States must intervene to save all that Kenyan oil from those evil terrorists here. More alarming, though, is a statement that was made by former U.S. Army General, Vice Chief of Staff General Peter Chiarelli, who said that their U.S. is already planning targets for military strikes in Kenya and adjoining African countries in order to target the militants involved in Sunday's deadly attack on the shopping mall. Well, if Peter King is right, and they came from the United States, is the U.S. going to start drone striking the United States of America? Doesn't make any sense. We'll be right back. Hello, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, the FBI has just issued a statement that, contrary to what Representative Peter King is saying, and the supposed announcement from the attackers, or somebody claiming to speak for the attackers, that they are unable to confirm any Americans present at that mall in Nairobi. So the story is kind of thrashing around. We're going to grab a phone call here real quick. Kent in West Virginia. Aloha, Kent. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, a couple of things. You mentioned Entebbe. I was listening to the BBC, watching the BBC report about this thing, and, of course, they were going on and on about why the close association with Israel and Kenya, and, of course, they went back. You mentioned they used that Entebbe to grab land. Well, they've also used that to grab political affiliations, which gives them de facto control, because they said that when Entebbe happened, they just happened to realize that they had to make alliances in West Africa, so I'm sure they used that to gain entree to the sympathies of the people in Kenya. Of course, then once they have their diplomatic looks into them, well, they really control them. And you mentioned Somalia. Now, a couple of years ago, I heard on the CBC a Somali woman saying that how they have all of a sudden there's a Somali community up in Canada, and they all of a sudden have autism, and there's also a community in Minnesota, and there's also a community in Sweden, and they all have autism. And just this morning, they were saying that, oh, well, we've got all these Somalis down here that have, and they said Somalis from America and Somalis from Canada and Somalis from Sweden. So they're really stirring it up all over the globe with this sort of thing.
Yeah, they are. They're just pumping this thing as hard as they can. And like I said, I'm convinced right now this is some kind of a false flag operation. And my concern is it's a prequel. It's a warm-up to the main event to take place next month here. Anything else, Kent?
Well, I'm just wondering if that Jewish owner, what about it has insurance policies?
Well, that's probably he's, like Larry Silverstein. He's probably going to make out very well from this. It's a nice-looking mall. I mean, looking at that the video footage, it's a very nice modern mall.
Probably just not big enough, so maybe I just have to...
Who knows what's going to go on there. But you need to understand, whether it's the U.S. or Britain or Israel, the reason Africa is a prize is it is the world's last remaining storehouse of undeveloped natural resources. The rest of the world has been mined and drilled and, sifted and all the rest of that to where the resources that remain are very hard to get at. Africa is just this huge, vast, untapped wealth of natural resources, and everybody wants to control it. And like I said, Kenya just discovered new oil reserves in part of their country. Mali, of course, has discovered additional gold deposits here, which is probably why France decided to invade 1 week after Germany asked for their gold bullion back, and it just goes on and on and on. Okay?
And discovered a huge underground water aquifer under Kenya as well, so that's just icing on the cake, I guess.
Yeah, it's a huge, huge prize there. I mean, we're going to wind up at wars over water. That's the reason Israel keeps trying to invade Lebanon. They want that Litani River.
Well, maybe if they could steal the water from Kenya, they can leave somebody else alone. I don't think that'll happen, though.
Well, I mean, apparently here in the U.S. there's an argument going on between Georgia and Tennessee that apparently the border between their states was somehow misdrawn on the maps from the original survey that was supposed to set the borders, and at issue is access to a river and a water supply. So they're going back and forth about that. Kent, going to let you go here. Got a few more things I want to cover here before the next commercial break. There is actually a link between Kenya and 9/11, because we were talking about the Kenyan embassy bombing and who was responsible for it. And there were a couple of them in there, and there was a big one in 1998, which Osama bin Laden was blamed for. Now, at the time, the FBI's top internal expert on Osama bin Laden was named John O'Neill, but he was kept away from the investigation into this Kenyan embassy bombing that was blamed on Osama bin Laden. And then he was forced out of the FBI by political pressure. But not a problem, because he got himself a really nice job as security director for the World Trade Center, in which he died on 9/11. So a little bit of a link there. The FBI was keeping their own top expert on Osama bin Laden away from a bombing that was being blamed on Osama bin Laden. And the official story was very shaky to begin with. Just like this current story about the mall is very, very shaky. And with a planet full of very skeptical people that are expecting dirty tricks by the U.S. and Israeli and other governments. I'm already seeing all over the independent media, people are writing stories saying, I'm not buying the official story on this. I've been lied to so many times, I don't want to be made fool of again. They're looking for reasons not to believe the official story, and they are finding them. Now, moving on to Syria, which, unfortunately, it turns out my warnings of last week were correct. The U.S. is trying to find a way to move forward with an outright military invasion. They're trying to find some way to destroy this deal brokered by Russia over the chemical arms and somehow make it look like it's Syria's fault. Russia is saying right now the Obama administration is trying to blackmail the Russians into going along with a resolution against Syria that includes military option up at the United Nations, saying that if the Russians won't go along with that, the U.S. is going to pull out of the ongoing discussions regarding chemical weapons up at The Hague. Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov is out there saying it is very obvious the U.S. agenda is to get the authorization for the use of force even over and above the issue of chemical weapons in Syria, which makes perfect sense when you understand that whole Syrian chemical weapons attack by Assad was an obvious hoax right from the start. It's just they're seeking justification to go into Syria in order to open the door to war with Iran, which is what they've been wanting all along. So the latest tactic by the United States is to declare everything that Syria is doing in furtherance of that negotiated settlement to be inadequate. When Russia and Syria and the U.S. agreed to this deal, Syria said, okay, step one is we're going to send you an inventory of our chemical weapons so that we can plan how to decommission and get rid of them. And Syria submitted its chemical weapons report, at which point the United States declared it as inadequate. It's not good enough. We know there are more weapons out there. And so as a result, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons indefinitely postponed any meetings regarding Syria's chemical weapons. In other words, they're just throwing the brakes on and saying, we don't trust the report you're sending, we're not going to look, period, end of discussion. So the Russia plan is basically on hold right now, and that gives the United States opportunity and room to try and go forward with the invasion that they have been lusting after. They're looking for a way to kill the Syria chemical weapons deal and try and make it look like it's Syria's fault by standing there and saying, we don't care what you do, it's not enough for us, which, by the way, if you'll remember, was the same tactic they used in Iraq, where Saddam Hussein was saying, look, whatever it takes to document that we don't have nuclear weapons, and the U.S. said, too little, too late. We don't believe you. We know you have nuclear weapons. We saw it on our tea leaves, on the Ouija board. The tarot card told us you have nuclear weapons. The invasion was on. And when it was all over, of course, it came out, Iraq did not have nuclear weapons. They had, in fact, destroyed all of their weapons of mass destruction in compliance with the United Nations Security Council resolution. They were not defying the UN. They did not have these weapons, but the U.S. invaded anyway. And we're seeing the exact same tactics being used all over again. No matter what Syria does, the U.S. will just declare by imperial edict it is not sufficient, the war is on. Now, I know that you and I had all hoped someone with some sense in Washington, D.C. would listen to the war-weary American people. But as I keep pointing out, the real agenda is a war of conquest against the globe to force the world back onto Bretton Woods, to use only the dollar for international trade and banking, to prop up the petrodollar with other people's natural resources. And from that point of view, the people behind these wars, the bankers, see them as absolutely essential. They must have them or the dollar will fail. So from their point of view, it doesn't matter how many millions of other people's children they send to death to keep their little ink and paper thing going. And that's really the situation we are in right now. And it will bring us to war with Russia and China. Now, apparently, during this week's meeting of the General Assembly at the United Nations, Obama is planning to stand up there before the General Assembly and say that Assad must go. Syria's Assad must go. They must adopt a new government that we like, period, end of discussion. Now, if Assad gets up and demands Obama's removal, I'll bet he gets a standing ovation. We'll be right America, back. Welcome back to the show. And I'm getting a lot of email from people coming in saying they think the Russian embassy bombing was another false flag, trying to get the Russians to mind their own business about all this stuff. All righty, let's see. Now, getting back to Syria, Britain's ex-envoy, former British ambassador to Uzbekistan, is saying the blame for the false intelligence regarding Syria is coming straight from Israel, which we've been speculating all along. Israel has a long history of fabricating intelligence and sending it to the United States of America, so the U.S. government will say, yes, master, I must go kill Iraq, or I must go kill whoever. And after all the lies that Israel has been caught at, whether it's USS Liberty or the Levant affair, why anybody in Washington, D.C. would listen to them anymore just defies belief. Either they are all incredible morons inside Washington, D.C., or it is simply that they know if they don't believe the Israeli propaganda and act on it, AIPAC will not write them those juicy little campaign checks next year. Now, speaking of Israel and propaganda, they have launched a media blitz against Iran's new president, Hassan Rouhani. And the goal is they were working as hard as they could to demonize Ahmadinejad to move forward the agenda for war with Iran. Well, Ahmadinejad is gone. Their villain that they worked so hard to demonize. Remember how they basically mistranslated something Ahmadinejad said to make it sound like he wanted to wipe Israel off the map. And it turned out to be one of memory's deliberate mistranslations. And now they've got a new president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani. He's only been in office a couple of months, and they're already out there trying to cast him as the ultimate villain that we have to just absolutely destroy. Now, he is the democratically elected leader of a sovereign nation, elected by clear majority, properly inaugurated. He is the legitimate ruler of Iran. He hasn't been there long enough to really do anything, and already Israel is out there demonizing him as hard as they can. Why? Well, because one of the first things Rouhani has said is, let's go back to the table and talk about this nuclear issue. And I might be ready to, pull out of the enrichment in exchange for lifting of sanctions. And, of course, Israel's response is, no, don't you listen to him. Don't you meet with him. Don't listen to him. He's lying. He's building a bomb. They're just weeks away from a bomb. And, of course, Israel's been screaming that Iran is just weeks away from a nuclear weapon all the way back to 1985. And, of course, what makes this such a joke, of course, is that Israel is a nuclear-armed nation. And they will not sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They will not allow IAEA inspections. But always it's Israel pointing the finger saying, Iran is bad, Iran is bad. They're lying. They're making bombs inside their bakeries. They're breeding germs inside their breweries or wineries or whatever they've got over there. And I know Muslims don't drink much, but you get the idea here. You have the one nation in that region that actually has nuclear weapons of mass destruction, that refuses to play by the rules, screaming that Iran is the bad guy here. So Israel's out there saying there's no more time for negotiations. They're absolutely scared that Rouhani might make a substantive offer to reduce Iran's nuclear enrichment. Probably by now they've got enough fuel rods to keep their power station going for 20, 30, 40 years. And they don't need to do any more enrichment. And Israel's absolutely terrified that Obama, feeling the pressure from we the American people, might say, all right, yeah, if they're willing to suspend enrichment at 20%, we'll cut some of the sanctions out. And so they're already out there. Netanyahu was out there screaming, that Obama can't listen to Rouhani at all. And apparently so far from the White House we're getting, don't worry, Israel. We promise we won't listen to him. We only listen to you. We only listen to Tel Aviv. We know that the rest of the world is just full of liars and anti-Semites. But they're out there with this full court press, doing what Israel always does, screaming some other nation must be attacked as long as somebody else's kids get to do the dying for it. Now, Israel is, by most estimates, the world's sixth most powerful nuclear-armed state. They can and should handle their own wars. So in doing this, in constantly screaming that the U.S. has to go kill Israel's enemies, Israel is proclaiming itself to the world that despite the flood of U.S. taxpayer-supplied weapons, despite their nuclear arsenal, they're a bunch of cowards who will not fight their own wars. That's what Israel is effectively saying with this media push. We're cowards. We've got all these guns and weapons and nuclear bombs and all the rest of it, but we're scared of the Iranians, so you Americans have to go do it for us. So apparently the United States, this is a story coming out of Times of Israel, the United States is making a behind-the-scenes effort to convince Israel it won't fall for Iranian President Hassan Rouhani's charm offensive and prematurely ease pressure on Tehran on the nuclear issue. Bibi Ben Kenobi's out there saying, these aren't the peace terms you're looking for. We don't need to see Rouhani's offer. The fix is in. Israel wants America's children to go make war with Iran, so America's children are going to go die making war with Iran. and there is nothing that you can do about it, they say, or they think at any rate. It's a very different world right now, and I think the American people are really very sick and tired of seeing their children blown to bloody bits in wars on Israel's enemies, because it's a failed concept. Israel is making enemies faster than America could ever possibly kill them. Interesting and very informative article that came out earlier today. Israeli response to Rouhani betrays its own intransigence. And what it's basically saying is the harder and harder Israel pushes that hard line, bomb Iran, bomb Iran, bomb Iran, don't do anything else, don't think anything else, just go ahead and bomb them, the more and more it looks like Israel is the problem child here. And they are. Now remember, Iran has not launched a war of aggression in over 200 years. Certainly since 1979 and the Iranian Revolution that kicked out the U.S. puppet, the Shah. They have not attacked anybody. They had to defend themselves against the invasion and attack by Iraq that was sponsored by the United States to retake Iran and put the Shah back in and prove that, by golly, once you're a U.S. puppet, you will stay a U.S. puppet. But it is not Iran's nature to start wars of conquest and attack other people. And it stands in stark contrast to the United States and Israel, which can't seem to go 6 months without bombing somebody, somewhere, to prove how butch they are. But Netanyahu is out there just screaming, kill them, don't listen to them, don't even consider that there's a possibility of a peaceful solution. The only solution is you've got to kill them for us. AIPAC has stepped on in, despite the earlier assurances that AIPAC was going to stop lobbying for war on Capitol Hill, at least with regards to Syria. They're definitely up there pushing on Iran. And they're drawing more of their red lines. There's a red line out there that Iran has crossed. And apparently AIPAC sent out a memo on Friday, basically to all members of Congress saying, it doesn't matter what Rouhani says. You, the American people, have to go make war on Iran. And of course, Israel understands there is a very powerful financial motive for the U.S. to go to war with Iran. And they're taking advantage of that. Remember, wars are never started for just one cause. Wars happen when you have 10 or 20 different groups who stand to benefit from war, each for their own reasons. And when you have that critical mass of groups, bankers, nations that say, yeah, war on X would be good, war on X is going to start happening. And that's what's going on here. Israel has their reasons for war with Iran. They understand that Wall Street and the U.S. have their reasons for war with Iran. And they're trying to basically pull together a coalition of everybody who stands to profit from war with Iran to get this war with Iran going. And it doesn't matter how many other people's children have to die. I think Israel ought to fight their own wars, because I don't think there's anywhere in the Constitution where control of this nation and its military is for sale to a foreign power. Welcome back to the show, hour number 2. We're going to take a phone call here. Bill in Illinois. Aloha, Bill. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Hi, Mike. I've been watching a lot of these Syrian war videos, what's going on over there on YouTube, and it seems like one of the things that would cause them to have a false flag attack, gas attack, is because things aren't going as they had planned. They're finding a lot of these dead terrorists over there with foreign passports, Somalia and all Chad, all over the place,
Even some Americans.
And my thought is maybe the boots on the ground that we sent over there are not reporting back anymore.
Well, first of all, the fact that the U.S. was attempting to employ some radical Islamic groups that proceeded to carry out a whole bunch of atrocities did not build a lot of support among the Syrian people. Right now, 70% of the Syrian people support Assad. Only 10% support the hired mercenaries. The other 20% are undecided. And the more these hired mercenaries carry out the atrocities they're videotaping themselves doing, the more people are shifting back to supporting Assad. Assad also did a very, very clever thing. He offered a complete, total, unconditional amnesty to anybody who was supporting the rebels who would come back on the side of the Syrian government, and a lot of people took advantage of that. And so one of the reasons that we know Assad isn't using chemical weapons on his people is because he doesn't need to. He's winning conventionally, and he understands that using chemical weapons is not only going to open the door for a direct U.S. Intervention, it's going to destroy his popular support. And that's another reason why we know this idea that he gassed women and children of the Alawite sect right in front of the UN chemical weapons inspectors was just another U.S. DA choice pile of bovine excrement.
Yeah, well, there was one video where they showed a farmer's truck had just been sniped by one of the terrorists, and the government of that town that they were in called the army in to clear out the snipers. And, you know, I didn't see the army sniping any of the traffic going down this main highway through this town. It was just the terrorists shooting at random trucks.
Yeah, this is a covert attempt at an overthrow that has failed miserably after going on 3 years, and that's why the U.S. is desperate to justify a direct military intervention. And we all know it's another government lie, just like Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. The whole world knows it. Nobody is buying any of these official claims, but apparently the U.S. federal government has basically adopted a policy of, this is our excuse, and we're going to move forward on that excuse, and we don't care what you think because there's nothing you can do to stop us, which may or may not be accurate.
And one more thing. After one of the videos, this made me laugh because when I seen it, it was a picture of Obama dressed as Osama bin Laden with the beard and everything, and on top of the picture it said Wahhabi. So they know who is coming over there and causing all the problems.
Oh, this is a repeat of what they tried to do in Iran in 2009 by, sending in agent provocateurs, try and kick up a fuss and say, oh, there's a new Iranian revolution and we've got to support it. And then they did a couple of major blunders. For one thing, the son of the Shah of Iran couldn't keep his big mouth shut and said, I am ready to resume the peacock throne. And, of course, the Iranian people said, whoa, no, we're not going back to that. And remember when they were handing out from the vans those pre-printed, these ready-to-go flags of the new Iran, and it turned out to be the flag of the Shah. And when the Iranian people saw that, they said, absolutely not. We are not going back to that kind of a system of government. And so that fell apart rather badly. The same thing is in Syria. They send in, same thing they did in Libya, send in agent provocateurs, stir up as much unrest as possible, claim it's a revolution and we must support the revolution against the evil Gaddafi or the evil Assad or the evil this space available.
Yeah, but I encourage everybody to get on YouTube and start watching these videos and see the things that I had seen, and that'll open your mind up and make you realize what is happening over there. I'll let you go.
Yeah, it's a covert attempt at overthrow, and again, General Wesley Clark back in 2003 went public saying he was shown an internal U.S. government memo of a plan to conquer all of the nations of the Middle East, to take control of their oil, to make sure it was only available for sale for U.S. dollars. And he went right down the list of targets, ending with Iran. And the U.S. has, in fact, invaded and conquered or regime changed most of the nations on that list. And now they're after Syria and they're after Iran. And with Venezuela, even under its new leadership, moving closer and closer to China, somehow they're going to come up with a reason to invade Venezuela. Now that Hungary has freed itself from the international global bankers, they're going to come up with a reason to invade Hungary. And that's why this policy is failing. Nations are moving away from the U.S. dollar faster than the U.S. can conquer them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I say they better watch out what they do over there in Syria, because they have the Russian Spetsnaz over there fighting. And these guys aren't a group to be
well, I think we have to be very, very careful about any military action that directly impacts on Russian nationals, because that hedges us closer and closer to an outright state of war. And I understand the money junkies want war with Russia and China. They actually think the United States is going to prevail against Russia and China, even if it takes nuclear weapons, so that the entire world will come back underneath Bretton Woods and be enslaved to the U.S. dollar. And the Federal Reserve will go back to simply overprinting it with wild, reckless abandon to loot the rest of the world of manufactured goods and agricultural produce, just like they did in the post-World War II years. The rest of the world doesn't want to go along with this. They got sick and tired of Bretton Woods after Nixon ended gold convertibility. And it was propped up with the petrodollar, but now resource-rich areas are saying, I'm going to sell my resource for whatever the going currency is that I can actually trade for goods and produce. See, that's a big problem with the United States having lost its manufacturing and poisoned its own agriculture with GMOs. Nobody wants to trade those ink and paper tickets, those Federal Reserve notes, for anything the U.S. is selling. So they just keep piling up and piling up and piling up, and they're, from the point of view of a nation that needs to import goods, those U.S. dollars are worthless because they can't trade them back to the United States for machinery and appliances and cars and medicines and food that is actually going to be any good. And that's why this is really falling apart.
Yeah, they are extremely desperate, and they realize that things ain't working out and may not work out at all.
Yeah, and that's why I'm very concerned. They're almost to the point where another big, gigantic false flag is the last card they've got to play. And the only way we're going to head that off is to create a climate of doubt. We have to shake their confidence that if they just make the false flag big enough, if they use a big enough nuke to destroy Charleston Harbor, that we will all forget about all the other lies, salute the flag, and throw our babies onto the designated enemy's bayonet. We have to break that confidence. We have to send a message to the U.S. government and the rest of the world saying, we the people of the United States of America know the federal government is lying to push their war agenda. And if we can make them doubt, they may call it off. Unfortunately, the people really pushing for this thing, they don't care if they're being believed or not. They're just hoping they can move forward with the war agenda and the American people will just sit quietly and tolerate it, if not accept it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'll let you go.
All right. Thank you very much here. And, of course, there's a big of a scandal breaking because, as you're probably aware, over at the IAEA, they voted to basically ignore Israel's nuclear arsenal, even as they're going on and on about chemical weapons and biological weapons and nuclear weapons in other countries that don't actually exist. But the one genuine nuclear-armed nation, we're not going to talk about them because they'll just call us anti-Semites if we do. I'm going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And there's been another incident that's not getting a lot of attention here in the United States of America, and it has to do with an international humanitarian aid convoy in Palestine that included European diplomats. Okay, now, August was supposed to be the month where Israel and Palestinians were due to resume peace talks. And then, as if by magic, that unexplained chemical weapons incident occurred in Damascus, which sidelined the peace talks. Oh, we can't talk peace with the Palestinians. We have Syrian chemical weapons here. And apparently over this last weekend, Israeli IDF soldiers raided an international diplomatic humanitarian convoy carrying much-needed aid and provisions for the oppressed native Bedouin Palestinian population in the West Bank. And the attack included a physical assault on a French diplomat, prompting outrage from the European Union. Diplomats are not supposed to be touched. And the IDF apparently just beat this guy up. There's another reason to fake a terror attack at a shopping mall in Africa, distract the media. We can't have them talking about how the IDF is violating international laws, first with the starvation blockade against the Palestinians, and second with these attacks on diplomats trying to get food and medicine and supplies to these people. Meanwhile, another little outrage, and this is not getting any coverage here in the United States of America, there is another incident involving what's called the Machpelah House, where these two Israeli families simply moved into this house, belongs to Palestinians, and they simply moved in and said, this is now ours. And the local Israeli authorities, the Israeli army, to their credit, said, you can't just move into this house that belongs to these Palestinians and take it for yourself. And they evicted these two Israeli families who just stole the house. Benjamin Netanyahu has now issued orders that these two Israeli families are to be put back into the house. And this was what he said about it. Those who try and uproot us from the city of the patriarchs will achieve the opposite. We will continue to fight terrorism and strike at terrorists on the one hand and strengthen settlement with the other. So now he's trying to equate the idea of Israelis stealing Palestinian land with the fight on terror. Well, you know something? When you steal other people's land, they are going to fight back. And that's not terrorism. That's defense. And so now we have Netanyahu just openly violating not only international law, but even Israeli law. And say, yes, you Israelis in the settlements, you can just take any Palestinian homes you want. But of course, if anybody complains about that, they're just being filthy anti-Semites. Meanwhile, getting over to the situation in Iran, Russia is ignoring U.S. sanctions and is preparing to build a gas pipeline with Pakistan and Iran. The U.S. is making war. Russia is making deals. The chess master is showing his strength again. They're going to put in a pipeline. And that's one more set of resources no longer under the control of the United States of America. Now, here in the United States, of course, this week, and probably timed in order to distract from what's going on over at the United Nations, Congress is locking horns over whether or not they're going to raise the debt limit. And central to that, of course, is the House resolution to defund Obamacare. And so we're setting up for this little professional wrestling match in Congress where they're going to scream and yell at each other and say, it's your fault, you're the bad guy, we're trying to keep things going, how dare you challenge the president, so forth and so on. They're talking about a potential U.S. government shutdown the first part of October, ironically on top of all those FEMA preparations regarding Region Number 3. And the reality is that we're all dealing with the official U.S. government debt is listed at $17 trillion. But that, too, is a fraud, just like the claims about the jobless rate, unemployment, state of the economy, Saddam's nuclear weapons, all the rest of it. It is a lie, because when you include in unfunded mandates and what's called off-the-books projects, mostly related to defense, the real U.S. federal government debt is $211 trillion. And I will leave it as an exercise to the listeners to take that $211 trillion and divide it by 330 million Americans, or 100 million American households, to find out how much money, plus accruing interest, the U.S. government will take from you in future taxes, for which you will receive nothing in return. No services, no roads, no schools, nor hospitals. They will just take and take and take, trying to support this $211 trillion out-of-control debt. And it comes out to a lot. It comes out to basically, just off the top of my head, it's about $1 million per American household. They are literally doing their economic forecasting on, and they're doing the additional borrowing, because that's what raising the debt ceiling means, on this idea that somehow they will extract $1 million from every American family in taxes, for which nothing will be returned at all. That's their model. Personally, I think most American families will never see $1 million, let alone have it to give to the government for free and expect nothing in return, but that's where the numbers work out. Now, Nancy Pelosi, of course, is out there screaming that we've got to raise the debt ceiling. There's nothing left to cut in the budget. The cupboard is bare. We've got to raise taxes and raise borrowing and so forth and so on. But, of course, Ms. Pelosi is flat out wrong. There are plenty of places to make cuts to balance the federal budget. We could start with all that money being sent to Israel, now totaling more than 4 times the entire cost of the Apollo moon program, for which we have yet to receive a giant leap for mankind. Israel does not need U.S. financial help to defend themselves, as they are now admitted to be a nuclear power. They have nuclear weapons. Germany acknowledged, they've known for years, that Israel arms those German-supplied Dolphin-class submarines with nuclear-tipped cruise missiles. Documents that surfaced after the collapse of the previous South African government confirm Israel has been trying to sell clandestine nuclear weapons to other countries, the very activity the Non-Proliferation Treaty is supposed to prevent. So we could cut off that money. Israel doesn't really need all that financial support to defend itself. They want it. The hand is always out. Then there are all the bailouts to Wall Street. Trillions of dollars of bailouts to Wall Street, TARP, quantitative easing, a bunch of other programs just going on and on and on. And by the way, I'm looking at this story out of Market Watch, where two senior Federal Reserve officials are saying it's impossible to taper quantitative easing. And it's a reminder of what I said all along. They have now become addicted to that instant $85 billion every single month. They can't stop. When the Fed announced the continuation of quantitative easing and the stock market soared, it underscored how dependent Wall Street is on that constant infusion of new cash every single month. But we ought to cut off the infusion. We ought to let those companies that didn't do business well go out of business. The United States should do what Iceland did in the wake of the collapse of the 2008 mortgage-backed securities fraud, which is to throw the criminal bankers in prison, fire the government that helped them loot the people, and write off all the debt created through fraud. It worked in Iceland. It will work here. And we could balance the budget. When we come back, a couple of other places that we should be cutting spending to balance the federal budget. America, welcome back to the show. We're going to take a phone call. Art off the grid. Aloha, what's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. You know, I listened to Obama give this little speech there on the national debt, and you know, something he said just really just tickled the bejeebies out of me. And these are rhetorical questions, of course, but you know, he says, I love it. He stands there and he says, we can't just let the government shut down. You know, the world looks to the United States to maintain that balance and of the world global currency and the stability that the dollar brings. And I'm laughing and I'm thinking, stability? What stability is he talking about? But then he goes on and he says, if we let the government, well, this is not a direct quote, but basically he says, if we let the government just shut down on October 1st, well, what we're doing is we're telling the rest of the world that the United States doesn't have to pay its bills, and the United States has got to be responsible for paying its bills, and that's why we got to raise that ceiling. This is what he's telling everybody. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, let's look at this from a household perspective. We got a credit card. Or let's say we got 3 credit cards between me and my wife and my brother who lives with me. And then, of course, we got our emergency credit card. And we got them all maxed out. Now, it doesn't make much sense to go out and get another credit card and max that out. And, of course, you know, when you get these really high balances on your card, what does the credit card company like to do? They like to increase, as long as you're in good standing and you at least pay your premium every month. Well, they would just love to increase your card limit, wouldn't they? Mm-hmm. Well, isn't that the same thing that they're doing with the national debt? I mean, after all, we've seen it raised 3 times in the past, year now? Yes. That they keep raising it up. And Obama's saying, we got to pay our bills. Well, wait a minute. Mr. Obama, we can't pay the damn bills we got now. That's why we have a debt limit, so that we only go so far. You know, this would be I would say they're spending money like drunken sailors, but that's really not true, because at least a drunken sailor, he stops spending money when he runs out of it, when his wallet is empty. Obama, you know, you say you went to law school. I guess you went to Harvard or wherever it was you went, and you're a constitutional professor, but you don't even understand the Constitution. Where the hell did you go to learn economics?
Well, I would take it one step further. I mean, we've heard this argument over the years, that we must pay, the debts of the United States. And I would argue that if the government is borrowing and spending money contrary to the will of the people are not obligated for that debt. And this gets back to what I was saying about all these places they could cut the budget, could cut spending dramatically to balance the budget. But I would argue, going back to Thomas Jefferson's definition of the proper role of government is to do for the community what the community needs but cannot organize for itself. And all this other spending on wars and surveillance and repression and spying legally constitutes odious debt for which we, the people, are not responsible. And my comment to President Obama is, if you want to pay off the national debt, dip into your own pocket here, but you spent money contrary to the will of we, the people, and we, the people, are not responsible for that debt. And that is a recognized principle in international law called odious debt. We're only responsible for money that was borrowed for the benefit of the American people. Good roads, good schools, good hospitals. Not for Wall Street bailouts, not for money for Israel, not for money for wars of conquest, not money for spying on us all in order to keep us politically repressed. We're not responsible for that. And my comment to the U.S. federal government is, you got into this fiscal mess without our permission. You will get out of it, or not, without our help. Because looking at how much they're borrowing and spending and how unpayable the debt is, we know a collapse is now inevitable. All we, the people, can do is decide whether we're going to let ourselves get sucked down that black hole of debt with the government, or if we're just going to cut our losses, stop throwing good money after bad, step back and let it all fall apart, which is the better solution. Because, again, it doesn't matter how hard Americans work, how much they sacrifice, it will not alter the ultimate outcome. At the very best, it'll delay it for a little while. And that's not a good reason to sacrifice our children's future, to bail out a government that, you know, as fast as we try and bail it out, they're drilling more holes in the bottom of the boat.
Yeah, and, you know, then we got this dingbat coming out, what was it, Pelosi, coming out talking about there's no more areas where we can make any cuts. And, you know, you pointed out, you know, let's start with that 80 million or 80 billion a year we send over to Israel. But we don't want to stop there. How about, you know, foreign aid to countries like, remember just several years ago, we learned all the money that was being sent to Pakistan for relief and aid and food and things like this.
And it was all winding up in the hands of the government in order to buy their acquiescence to U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah, how about we just cut out all foreign aid completely? And, I don't know, how about here's a great one. Let's get rid of every single subsidy out there, and that includes farm subsidies and any other subsidy you can find, which will thus, in turn, by eliminating the subsidies, eliminate about 75% of all regulations on, say, farms, for example, and the farmers can get back to doing what they do best. And, gee, well, there's a nice, big, healthy cut of money right there that we could get rid of. And how about bogus research programs like a 2-year study on the mating rituals of bees and bears and things? We don't need to be studying this. Somebody wants to study that?
I can see some merit in studying, you know, bee reproduction as we deal with colony collapse disorder, but I think there was another one where they spent a whole bunch of money on the drinking habits of Thai hookers or somebody. Really, I mean, there's no question there's a lot of just absolute nonsense funded by the U.S. government, especially human-caused global warming. Art, I'm going to let you go here because I do want to go back and I want to elaborate on this list of things where spending could be cut drastically to balance the federal budget so we don't need to raise the debt ceiling. And we already talked about money for Israel, all the bailouts to Wall Street. And then there's another big one, and that is that massive spy system aimed at every law-abiding American and its citizens and governments around the world. Now, the exact cost of all of this stuff is classified. But with all these data centers across America, and we've got a brand new one here on the island of Oahu, that have the capacity to record every phone call made by the human race for the last 7 years, it can't be cheap. And given that their actions are a clear violation of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, those should be shut down and all that hardware sold for surplus. Because after all, that total surveillance did not stop the Boston bombing or the U.S. Navy Yard shooting. And I have already proved 3 times with my NSA challenges that real criminals and real terrorists can easily evade the NSA's cryptographers. Why should we waste money rewarding failure? Which reminds me, we should dump the TSA. In all their years of operation, they've looted a lot of luggage. They dropped and smashed one of my laptops. They've groped millions of crotches, spread who knows how much sexually transmitted diseases, looked at a lot of naked people, triggered an epidemic of skin cancers even among their own staff, destroyed tourism here in the United States, but in all that time, never once actually caught a single rear terrorist. We could also drop the BATF, as it is pointless for one government agency to try and control guns while another agency is handing them out to Mexican drug gangs through Fast and Furious. And, of course, the biggest cost of all are all these wars of aggression and conquest. And we, the people, don't support them because these are, like all wars, waged to protect the nation's moneyed interest, not to serve the American people. The U.S. spends more tax money on mass death than the rest of the world combined, much of it wasted on complete boondoggle projects like the F-22, the F-35, the USS San Antonio, and none of it is necessary for the defense of this nation. The fact is the United States can deter invasion of sovereign U.S. territory, as it's always done, relying on the nuclear arsenal. That's all we need to prevent other nations from attacking us. All the ships, landing craft, planes, bombers, tanks, drones, cruise missiles are not for defense but for invading other people's countries to force them to run their economies for the benefit of the U.S. bankers. Just imagine how easy it would be to balance the U.S. budget if the bankers paid for their own wars out of their own pockets. If we shut down this war machine, the U.S. government could immediately cut all federal taxes in half and still provide services that we, the people, want to the American people. And the economy would light up, freed of that burden of taxation. If Congress had confined its activities, if Congress had confined the spending of America's tax money to taking care of Americans, the budget would have been balanced long ago. Will be right America, back. Welcome back to the show. And responding to our previous caller's comment about subsidies, most Americans don't understand how big a part of the tax burden that is. And I'm looking at this article that came out of RINF.com, where basically the average American family's tax bill includes $6,000 a year in subsidies to big business. This is over and above what you directly pay those businesses for their goods and services. This is additional money taken from you as taxes and given to these corporations as U.S. government subsidies to make sure that they'll always do what the U.S. government tells them to do. The U.S. government's using your own money against you, whether it's grabbing it and using it as subsidies to buy the cooperation of large corporations like Facebook and YouTube and the rest of it, or all that spying on you. We're going to go to the phones here. Jim in Georgia. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, this is George from Texas.
Okay, well, we'll take George in Texas, and then we'll back up to Jim in Georgia. George, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I sat there and talked to a retired professor last Friday. You know, you talk about subsidies, and what he was saying is more like what really needs the big overhaul is the university system. And consisting of these government subsidies, he sat there and said there was audits done of these universities for how much revenue that these universities get from the athletics department, from broadcasting on television, all that stuff. They said these people shouldn't have to pay this high cost of education, and yet they get all these government subsidies, and they make billions of dollars in TV revenues. And he got out of the education system because he says people should be able to get an affordable education, but yet this university system is so corrupt.
Yeah, it definitely is, and not only that, it's becoming more and more politicized. We've been reporting on all these stories about how Jewish activists are literally screaming that, critics of Israel have to be banned from speaking on college campuses. They're trying to basically erase the boycott movement from the campuses. And when I went to college, these many years ago, universities and colleges were considered areas for the free exchange of new ideas for the generation that was preparing to take over control of the world. And now, like our elementary school system, it's just areas of indoctrination. We don't educate anymore, we indoctrinate. And I think that's one of the reasons why so many people are becoming very upset with Common Core, where most of the reading requirement consists of government policy papers and government propaganda. They're de-emphasizing reading the classics of literature, and half the required reading for Common Core basically consists of U.S. government-issued reports on things like human-caused global warming. It's nothing but propaganda all the way through our entire system.
Mike, when you went to college, was the cost of education pretty much inexpensive? Not very expensive, but you were able to keep a job and your roof over your head and still pay for your own education?
Well, it was a struggle, but I didn't have to take out any student loans. I worked my way through college as a professional magician, which gave me a certain amount of flexibility and freedom that most other people that were going to school did not have.
But this professor said for how much money they make, is that every student should be able to pay for his own college education and not break his wallet.
Well, I absolutely agree. I mean, college today has just turned into another device to lure people onto that debt treadmill for the rest of their lives. And I know our current generation of college graduates, they got lured in with promises of high-paying jobs if they would only borrow this money and get an education and get a degree. And when they came out, those jobs really weren't there. And now they're stuck with these high college loans, and there's a college loan bubble out there already. And it's our entire economy is just geared to getting people into debt, and nobody is paying attention to creating an economy where people are able to transform their labor into sufficient money to pay that debt off. And it's another example where our government and banking system has lost the overview. Everybody's taking care of their own wallet. They're taking care of their own stock portfolio. They're taking care of their own agenda and the agenda of their supporters. And nobody's really keeping an overview of what's best for the nation as a whole. And that has to be the responsibility of the federal government and certainly the White House. In fact, I think it was Harry Truman who said the president's job is really nothing more than throwing cold water on foolishness.
Well, I got one idea. We ought to incorporate the Iceland solution when we get our country back.
I agree.
And that means a total jubilee. No tax debt, no credit card debt, no mortgage debt, no student debt. Everybody gets a clean slate.
I would absolutely like that, but again, taking the sort of moral, ethical position under the principle of odious debt, we, the American people, are responsible for money that was borrowed to take care of our road, schools, and hospitals, but of course that's just a tiny, tiny fraction of the total government indebtedness. And I think most Americans would be okay saying, yeah, we're going to pay the money back that was spent for the benefit of the American people, but we're not responsible for money that was borrowed and spent for the benefit of Israel, for the benefit of Wall Street, and certainly for all these wars of conquest that don't benefit anybody except defense contractors and the supporters of Bretton Woods.
Well, thank you, Mike. Have a good day.
All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, other nations that have the same tax rates that the United States does do provide free education and health care. They provide a lot of services. Places like France and Norway are amazing. And here in the United States, we've got the worst of both worlds because we've got the same high taxes as those other nations, but it's not spent on we the people. We are expected to provide our own health care and go heavily into debt or buy huge, costly health insurance policies to pay for it. We're expected to pay for our own higher education and go into debt to do that. It's a double whammy. If we're supposed to pay for our own education and health care, then lower the taxes so we can afford to do that. But the reality is that the American taxpayer gets very, very little back for the money they pay in taxes. Government's the most expensive thing you're ever going to buy in your life. And I think it's time for a lemon law, where after you've made a few payments and you're not getting what the government was supposed to give you, that like a used car, you can take it back in and say, I'm invoking the lemon law. I want to take this one back in and get a new government. Remember that Cash for Clunkers program where they were giving you money to turn in your old fuel-inefficient car and get a more fuel-efficient, more intelligent car? I think we need a Cash for Clunkers for the government. Take the current government, which is wasteful, inefficient, not working for the American people, put it in that little mashing thing at the wrecking yard and bail it up into a solid block, and then we get a check with which to put forward toward a new government with better fiscal and management sense, a government that remembers their job is to take care of America first and foremost, and not go around the world invading and conquering other nations to loot their wealth to balance the debt problem arising out of a Ponzi scheme central bank. Now then, let's see. Phone lines are clear right now. And a lot of people are still talking about what happened last week when the Federal Reserve announced that they were going to continue quantitative easing. And by the way, there's already evidence surfacing that insiders were leaked the information on the Fed's decision a few minutes ahead of time and were able to basically pile in, buy up a huge block of stocks at the lowered prices, and then immediately after that spike, they sold off and just instantly made a whole bunch of money by gaming the system. So the whole system is rigged and it's crooked. It's a big club, as George Carlin says, and you aren't in it. So we're looking at this article over at the Wall Street Journal saying that because the market didn't respond quite the way everybody thought it would from the Fed announcement, that maybe the Federal Reserve's guidance of the economy isn't as infallible as a lot of people are thinking. And, of course, I think the real issue is the Federal Reserve isn't managing the economy of the nation for the nation or its people. It is managing the economy for its own profitability. And it always has. Private central banks do not run the economy for the benefit of the nation and the people. They run it to make themselves as rich as possible. And it's always been that way. Now, we were talking about Venezuela, even under its new leadership, is continuing to cozy up to China. China has just extended a $5 billion credit line to Venezuela, and it's sparked talk of the rise of the petro-yuan. And that's going to be keeping the boys at the White House up late at night for a while. Going to take a break for Phyllis Schlafly and commercials. America, welcome back to hour number 3 of our program. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Dan, the man, is now sitting in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, as we were talking about just before the break, Venezuela and China continue to move closer together. Now, back when Hugo Chavez was running Venezuela, he was always being demonized. How dare he sell Venezuela's oil to China for the yuan? How dare he spend that oil revenue on the Venezuelan people? What kind of a commie bastard is he? And Venezuela's new president, Nicolas Maduro, is basically continuing on the same policy of cozying up to China. China just extended a $5 billion credit line to Venezuela, denominated, of course, in yuan. And Venezuela is selling their oil to China for the yuan because they can take those yuan and turn around and send them to China and get really good manufactured goods, agricultural produce, things that are really useful. What has undermined the value of the U.S. dollar internationally is not only its drastic overprinting, but the fact that you can't send those dollars back to the United States and get anything really decent for them. Our manufacturing is in decline. The quality of American products is in decline. Nobody wants to buy our agricultural produce because of the GMO problem. And more of the world are starting to do their trade in oil using the yuan, which is why over at financialsense.com they have an article, The Rise of the Petro-Yuan, as a direct challenge to the petrodollar, which is why China is now on the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list. Meanwhile, Venezuela has complained to the United Nations over the U.S. denial of visas for their representatives to the United Nations General Assembly. Because apparently Venezuela, like every other country, sends a delegation to the UN General Assembly in New York, and the United States, apparently throwing another tantrum, expressing its displeasure that Venezuela is dealing with China, refused visas for several members of the Venezuelan delegation. And that is a diplomatic, tacky no-no. And Venezuela is now complaining, formally, diplomatically saying the United States isn't supposed to do that. It argues for the United Nations to possibly have its own piece of land somewhere on the planet. The way Washington, D.C. is not actually in one of the several states, the United Nations should not be in a country. There should be an island or some piece of land set aside that represents the United Nations itself, where the host country, the United States, can't play these games, can't deny visas, can't lock people out that it doesn't approve of, and most importantly, can't go in there and spy on the United Nations, which has provoked a huge diplomatic backlash among the United Nations and its member nations. So let's talk about Obamacare, because it's coming down that this is going to be the make or break for whether or not there's an emergency spending plan to keep the government operating after October 1. Personally, at this point, I'd say let's shut it down. Remember, Belgium went for something like a year without a central federal government, and life got better without all that interference and all that borrowing and spending. I think we ought to try that here for a year or 2 or 10 or 20 or 30. Now, Obamacare is estimated to increase the cost of health care by $7,000 for a family of 4. And it may actually limit the choices that family has. Remember, this is supposed to be Affordable Care Act. Oh, it was going to lower health care costs for everybody. No, it isn't. It's a pure giveaway to the health insurance industry and the health care industry. Your health care costs are going to go up by $7,400 a year for a typical family of 4, and your quality of health care will not go up with that increase in cost. Now, we're hearing that Obama has thrown a tantrum over the House vote to defund Obamacare, saying he's willing to shut down the government so the military won't get paid in order to get his way. Interesting little story over at 21st Century Wire where Obama is saying, they're trying to mess with me. And that's a very revealing statement because it tells us Barack Obama is making his decisions on the basis of his ego. He has personalized Obamacare because it's got his name in it. It's his legacy. And he views the Congress resistance to Obamacare not as an expression of the will of the American people, but as Congress defying him, messing with him. And he's going to dig in his heels, and by golly, he's going to get what he wants. To heck with will of the people and the constitutional law. Story over at RINF.com where Obama is saying there will be no talks over the debt ceiling. They will either raise the debt ceiling and leave Obamacare alone, or he will, by golly, shut down the government. Best thing that could happen, I think. I think if we went for a few weeks with the American people seeing the federal government not around any longer, they'd realize how much better life's going to be. And there's a new wrinkle, because as you know, this system, these Obamacare exchanges, are supposed to roll out on October 1st, less than 2 weeks away. A lot of things coming in that first week in October. And it turns out the software that the U.S. government spent somewhere like $90 million on is so buggy and flawed it can't correctly calculate how many subsidies an individual applicant is eligible for. They're basically saying this thing is coming up with completely wrong numbers. It's not ready to go. And yet Obama is out there saying, yes, by golly, on October 1st, we're going to move forward with this thing. They might as well be using a roulette wheel to figure out what your benefits are. Now, CNBC came out with a story earlier today saying most Americans are against defunding Obamacare. We have a survey, and they're reporting a solid majority of Americans oppose defunding the new health care law if it means shutting down the government and defaulting on debt. And reading the comments to that article basically says that the readers aren't buying that stuff. At this point, we're ready to let the U.S. federal government shut down. It's certainly not a benefit to the American people. It's a blessing for Wall Street and Israel and the war machine, but it's not a benefit for we, the people. So we ran our own poll at whatreallyhappened.com. Do you favor defunding Obamacare? 93% answered yes. Now, a little wrinkle about this thing. If you do not have health coverage that meets the approval of Obamacare. In other words, a lot of people have health care policies right now that are going to arbitrarily be declared as not meeting the minimum standard, at which point your insurance company will cancel that policy and present you with several new options, all of which are going to be much more expensive, because we saw this happen when car insurance was made mandatory. Now, if you don't have health care coverage, let's say you're young, you're healthy, you exercise, you're taking really good care of yourself, and you don't think you need health insurance because you never get sick, you're going to get fined by the Internal Revenue Service. And it turns out it is a sliding scale. In 2014, next year, if you don't have health insurance coverage that meets the standards set by Obamacare, you will be fined $95 or 1% of your taxable income. That's in 2014. In 2015, it goes up to $325 or 2% of your taxable income, whichever is greater. In 2016, it'll be $695 or 2.5% of your taxable income, which tells us by 2017 it's going to be a $1,000 a year fine if you're not buying the insurance the government says you should be buying. Okay, we're going to take a phone call here. Actually, no, we got a commercial break coming up here. Scott, stay with me. As soon as we come back from these commercials, I'm going to come back to you here. But what Obamacare is really doing is taking away your freedom of choice. I mean, I'm one of those people who thinks health insurance is a good idea, especially with this toxic nation that we live in, with all the chemicals in our food and scanners at the airport giving us skin cancer. I think you should have health insurance, but it shouldn't be up to the government what insurance you're buying and what your illnesses will be treated or not. We're going to take a break for commercials, back with phone calls after these words from our sponsors. Hello, America, welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones here. Scott in Virginia Beach. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Listen, I've called my representatives. I'm a liberal Democrat who was for Obamacare. But after the Syrian lie, I've called my representatives, not only told them that I want them to not back Obama up on this Syria attack, which thankfully they backed down, but also I don't believe in Obamacare anymore. Obama's lied to me about Syria. I don't trust anything in Obamacare. I want it erased. I want it gone. I want it repealed. I want it defunded. I want it stricken. This guy has humiliated our party. We're even talking about starting another party to get out of it. The DNC is totally discredited. Totally discredited.
Absolutely.
And Obamacare, I want Obamacare wiped. First of all, it's really not Obamacare. It's Romneycare. That's basically what it is. And that in the 2012 election was the biggest sham in history. We had Romneycare versus Obamacare, and there's no more proof than you need that our system is a sham than that.
Yeah, it's just totally geared to extracting the maximum wealth from the American people for the least amount of return. And, when they were selling Obamacare, it was always going to be it's going to lower costs. And then, of course, it turned out, no, it wasn't. It's going to increase your health care costs by $7,000 for every family of 4. And then, of course, we had Nancy Pelosi come out and saying, we never said it was going to lower your health care costs. And it's just another scam against the American people because, and again, they're still trying to push for carbon taxes, even as the IPCC gets ready to acknowledge the Earth hasn't actually gotten any warmer over the last 15 years. But we need the carbon taxes, and, we've got all these governments, including the United States, trying to get the IPCC to delete that part of the report they're getting ready to come out with that actually acknowledges there's been no warming. Because they need those carbon taxes. They got to float this little Ponzi scheme economy just a little while longer. And it's time for the American people to get very, very angry at all the lies.
And the carbon tax is it's nothing more than a backdoor way of nations losing their sovereignty to a new world order. And I'm calling on all Democrats who are listening, all liberal Democrats. You know that Obamacare is not what we wanted. We wanted healthcare nationalized, and Obamacare did not give that to us. It was a sham. It's Romneycare, and I'm calling on all Democrats listening who are appalled by the lies that Obama told us about Syria to call the representatives, mention Syria, reiterate that to them, and also say it's time for Obamacare to go. I don't trust it. I don't trust Obama, and I don't trust his Obamacare, which is AKA Romneycare. I want it gone.
I think most Americans are definitely in alignment with you, CNBC's assurances to the contrary notwithstanding. I think the Republicans scored a major hit with that commercial they came out with about the woman going in for the pap smear, and all of a sudden it's a leering Uncle Sam with the speculum, and, she gets all upset. And that's absolutely right. And there are so many problems with it. I mean, over and above the fact that this massive computer system that they've put together to track everybody's health care records is so full of mistakes and flaws, it really should not be put in there right now. But the problem I have with computerizing of medical records is we know that there's a huge amount of death and injury caused by medical mistakes, and those lawsuits that are moving forward on those mistakes are generally based on paper records which can't be altered. But if it's all in the computer, then it's very easy for somebody to go in and change a medical record in order to erase evidence of mistake. And it's all about protecting the medical establishment against the people. And we were reporting last week, the current estimate is now, in this country, United States of America, every year 400,000 Americans are killed by medical mistakes. And somewhere between 5 and 8 million suffer long-term harm from medical mistakes. And if you have a completely computerized medical history, it can be altered. There is absolutely nothing in this computer system that guarantees the security and accuracy of those medical records. They can be edited at any time, anywhere along the system to protect the finances of these large medical corporations.
And we don't trust our government. We don't trust the IRS, which is not part of the government. We don't trust the NSA. We don't trust the FBI, not with after Fast and Furious. So why would we trust them with our health care? If they really cared about our health, would they be allowing GMO food? Would they be allowing the stuff, the poison they're putting in their food? No, not at all. They don't care about our health. They care about the dollar.
That's right.
Almighty dollar.
It's all about extracting the maximum amount of wealth from the people for the least amount of upkeep. And you're absolutely right. If they genuinely cared about our health, they'd be dealing with the GMO crisis. They'd be dealing with some of these very toxic additives that are being put into our food. But they see them all as a profit opportunity, because if you're eating XY hydroxysolide that's in your macaroni and cheese and it makes you ill, well, there's a profit opportunity, because it's going to stimulate the economy, because you're going to run right off to the doctor and he's going to charge you a bunch of money to give you a prescription. You're going to go off to the pharmacy and you're going to give them more money for your prescription medication that you take that may or may not actually do anything. But that's what it's all about, stimulating the economy by allowing corporations to make us sick. If Americans were 100% healthy and taking care of themselves, doctors and medicine wouldn't be the huge moneymaker that it is. They depend on Americans being made sick in order to guarantee their profitability.
Not only sick, Mike, but also keeping us as dumb as possible, because only in a country
well, that part of it's
population, by trying to keep your population dumb, can you get away, after 10 years after the event, convincing people that 2 tall buildings can be brought down with diesel fuel and office fires.
Kerosene.
Can melt kerosene. That can melt 1 million tons of steel, in less than an hour and a half. Only in a country where you can dumb them down can you get away with that for 10 years.
Well, obviously that hasn't worked. That hasn't worked because, even 2 years ago on the 10th anniversary, when I was there in New York talking to people, nobody bought it. Polls are showing consistently nobody's buying the official story of 9/11. Nobody's buying the official story about Assad's gassing his own people. Everybody knows the U.S. government lied to us about Iraq's nuclear weapons. This is a government that has destroyed the trust of the people, and they're not going to get it back no matter how big a bomb they set off in Charleston. And that's just the reality. Scott, I'm going to let you go here because I want to hit a comment before the commercial break here. Over the weekend, I reprised to the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com that video of Obama saying, if you can't trust the government, we're going to have some problems. Okay? And we have some problems, Barry, big problems. And I wanted to share an insight with the White House. Now, as I mentioned before, I worked my way through college as a professional magician. And when you are a magician, you understand your first mistake is your last with any audience. Once you slip up and the audience sees the wire or the trapdoor or the card up the sleeve, the show is over. You will not get back the suspension of disbelief that all illusionists require, whether they're working the Magic Castle, sawing a lady in half, or the White House promoting Iraq's nuclear weapons. The one thing magicians should never, ever, ever do is tell the audience they are bad for having spotted the mistake in the first place. Nothing is going to alienate a magician's audience faster than that kind of arrogance. And yet that's what we're seeing coming out of the White House. You're wrong for not trusting us. No, you're wrong for having broken that trust. And we, the people, will no longer suspend our disbelief when the government assures us Assad is gassing his own supporters. We refuse to suspend our disbelief when you try and claim Iran is a big nuclear threat. We refuse to suspend our disbelief when you tell us that Israel is our friend. We have seen the card up the sleeve. We've spotted the trap door. We know where the rabbit is hidden. And standing there and trying to scream that we, the people, are wrong for having spotted the fraud isn't going to make things any better. The crisis of credibility the U.S. government faces is of their own manufacture, and now they got to live with it. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. A couple of interesting stories coming in here right now. Apparently CNN is now reporting, based on an anonymous White House source, that Assad is now moving his chemical weapons around in order to foil U.S. intelligence efforts. They are trying as hard as they can to find some way to derail this deal. Putin backed him into a corner. Kerry had to go along with this deal. Syria is playing by the rules. Now the U.S. is saying it's not sufficient, it's not sufficient. Now they're trying to build a case about, well, it doesn't matter what Assad says he's got. We know he's got more. He's moving them around. He's got something to hide. And all of this, of course, is coming from an anonymous administration source with absolutely nothing to back it up. It's just another U.S. government assertion. They actually still think the American people trust anything the White House has to say. And we don't. And with good reason, because there's another story coming out regarding that staged false flag terror attack at the mall in Nairobi. Remember, we were talking about this group, Shabaab, had supposedly released the name of 8 Americans who were involved in this terror attack. And Representative Peter King is out there saying, see, we have terrorists in this country. We have to be prepared. We have to watch all the Somalis. We've got to be prepared. There's going to be a new terror attack in this country. And apparently one of the names was a gentleman from Kansas City. And his name was on the list, and reporters in Kansas City have been going around to the local Somalian community, and nobody can confirm this guy is from Kansas City. It's an unknown name. The guy who runs the Somali Bantu Foundation in Kansas City says, I know all the families, the Somali families in Kansas City. That name is not there. So it's a made-up name to try and sell you the illusion that there are terrorists loose in America and we have to be prepared for a gigantic terror attack. The U.S. government's in a corner. They are absolutely in a corner. And a big false flag bang, a new 9/11. Like, remember, we ran that audio tape of Donald Rumsfeld saying, we need a new 9/11. The American people have forgotten there's a terror threat out there. They've calmed down. They're not afraid enough for us to use them to go to war. We need another one of those things. And it looks like they're getting ready to try it, probably sometime around the 1st of October. That's when there's this confluence of the government being defunded and all these other situations. We know that FEMA is preparing some kind of a major exercise or drill involving Region 3, which is Washington, D.C. and the surrounding area. Probably going to have those evil Somalian terrorists knock over the big prick, the Washington Monument, because it's already severely damaged from that fracking quake. So that's a good thing to knock over. And then we'll build a bigger prick. Article out of Investment Watch blog, the constellation of scandals has taken away President's moral authority to lead the nation. That is absolutely true. Whether you call it a constellation of scandals or floodgate, which is what we call it, yeah, it's a problem. You've got Benghazi, and apparently some of the families of those people who died in the Benghazi attack were trying to ask some questions in a hearing about Benghazi, and apparently the Democrats just got up and walked out. We don't want to hear your questions. We already know what's going on. We know what's best for the country. And that just made the situation worse. Now, another article over there at WashingtonsBlog.com titled Obama's I Am Not a Crook Moment. And it's pointing to the psychological ramifications of presidents making statements that will actually generate the opposite effect. And what they're doing is going back to when Richard Nixon said, well, the American people have the right to know if their president's a crook. And I am not a crook. And, of course, the first thing that occurred to everybody's mind is, if he's denying it, he's a crook, which, of course, it turned out to be. And so for Obama to get out there and say, if you're not trusting us, we have a problem, is simply going to hammer home the point. We cannot and should not trust anything this government has to say. And then he goes on in his academic speech saying, this is the United States of America. We're not a deadbeat nation. We don't run out our tab. We pay our bills. And, of course, that's sending a message that, there's a serious concern if the U.S. government can pay its bills. And there was that absolutely idiotic comment he made where raising the debt ceiling doesn't increase our nation's debt. Well, if you're not increasing the nation's debt, you shouldn't need to raise the debt ceiling. And he actually thinks Americans are dumb enough and trusting enough to fall for it. It's right out of Orwell. Freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength, war is peace, warming is cooling, and raising the debt ceiling doesn't raise the debt. That's where we are right now. And again, given that this U.S. government has borrowed and spent trillions upon trillions of dollars for purposes opposed by the American people, I reject any claim that we, the people, are responsible for that unpayable debt. Because this government never had any business borrowing and spending money for purposes other than those desired by the American people. Good roads, good schools, good hospitals, good reliable bridges, good reliable infrastructure. Not bailouts for Wall Street, not tons of money for Israel and other countries, not for military boondoggles like the F-22 and the F-35, not for wars of conquest to make the bankers happy. That was never the business of this government. This government's business is to take care of America first, second, and third. And that's all its business ever was. Now, more and more articles are starting to come out pointing to a link between that tragic shooting at the Washington, D.C. Navy Yard and prescription psychoactive medications. U.S. Representative Jeff Miller, we talked about him last week, he's the chairman of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, is saying, yes, one of the medications that Aaron Alexis was on does in fact provoke random acts of violence. And it's time to take a look at that. And it absolutely is. Of course, we understand why the corporate media doesn't want to report on this. They don't want to risk losing those lucrative advertising contracts from Big Pharma. Congress did hold hearings on this problem before, but chose to do nothing because, hey, next year's an election year, and they're already lining up for those big campaign checks from the pharmaceutical corporations. Meanwhile, and we talked about this last week, but you should be reminded about it, the FBI has now declared that anybody who doubts the official government story on 9/11 is now a potential terrorist. That basically is about half, at least half of the American population, is now declared to be potential terrorists. This is the way Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union and the Stasi in East Germany would operate. Find a reason to declare everybody a suspect, and then they didn't need to worry about civil rights. Oh, well, you doubt the official story of 9/11. The Fourth Amendment doesn't apply to you anymore. We can come in and loot your iPhone and your tablet and your desktop computers because you're a terror suspect, because you refuse to believe the official story on anything. Apparently, the list of potential terror suspects includes anybody talking about the Second Amendment, anybody interested in self-sufficiency, meaning the preppers, fear of government encroachment on civil liberties, fear of big government makes you a potential terrorist because big government is your friend, big government loves you, big government would never do anything to harm you. And, of course, people talking about the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution or civil liberties were all now declared potential terrorists by the FBI. Kind of reminds me of the heyday of militant feminism in the 1990s where all men were declared potential rapists. And it was nonsense and it was silly because we're not. And we're not potential terrorists. We have legitimate reasons to doubt the official story about pretty much everything. In fact, I'm hard-pressed to find anything that the U.S. government and the corporate media have said over the last 30 years that I have any kind of confidence I'm getting the straight dope on. But that doesn't make me a terrorist. It makes me annoying and irritating and obnoxious, but I'm not a terrorist. Now, apparently, Republican Congressman Mike Rogers, who's a member of the Select Intelligence Committee, is out there saying, for all intents and purposes, the U.S. government should kill all whistleblowers. He's saying we have to stop this culture of disclosure. We have too many people carrying the government's wrongdoing into the public. And so his solution is not to stop committing crimes against the people, but we've got to silence the people who are blowing the whistle. He's out there saying that Daniel Ellsberg should have been executed for leaking the Pentagon Papers, and Bradley Manning should have been killed. What did Bradley Manning do? He leaked a video that documented a U.S. war crime. helicopter attack ship hovering over a group of unarmed men, including journalists, and just gunned them down in cold blood. That's what Bradley Manning put out. And Congressman Mike Rogers thinks he should have been killed for that. We'll be back after these America, welcome back to the show. And boy, they are getting desperate to sell this war with Syria to the American people. Because over at Oregon Live, a writer named David Ignatius has come out with a story that Syria is using mobile biological weapons laboratories that can drive around and mix up sarin and be undetected. Ooh, be afraid. This is a repeat of the same lie they tried during the run-up to the war with Iraq, where Colin Powell was out there screaming, they've got mobile biological weapons laboratories, and they showed pictures of the units, which turned out to be British-built artillery balloon inflation systems. It was a complete lie and fabrication, and I guess, the people in Washington, D.C. can't come up with any new ideas, so they're recycling this particular piece of bovine excrement from the war in Iraq. They're desperate to find a way to derail the Russia-Syria chemical weapon deal by saying, oh, they're out there, they've got mobile labs, there's no way they're telling the truth. They're raising on a busted flush on this one. A couple of other stories as we head to the end of the show here. Lois Lerner, who was the official over at the Internal Revenue Service at the heart of this targeting of political dissidents, is not going to jail. Is not suffering any problems whatsoever. She is now retiring. It just announced she's retiring. No other details because of IRS policies regarding privacy. But apparently she's very comfortable with just retiring now. Probably going to have a nice fat pension to just go away and not be in the news anymore. Meanwhile, another story, and this actually got reported on Fox News, the Internal Revenue Service was going around flagging groups and taxpayers by searching for anti-Obama rhetoric in their social media and their websites. Now, this has absolutely nothing to do with the overtly stated purpose of the Internal Revenue Service, which is to collect revenue for the private central bank. And again, using the IRS to go after political enemies was an article of impeachment against Richard M. Nixon. It should be an article of impeachment against Barack Obama. Now then, remember back when Cyprus did what they called a bail-in, where they went out and literally confiscated money from savings accounts of their depositors in order to balance their books and avoid a crash. And everybody said, oh, only time they don't need to worry about it. It's never going to happen again. It was a one-time emergency procedure. Of course, that's what they said back when they started quantitative easing, and now they're hopelessly addicted to it. Then we found out that European Union is considering it all across the European Union. Canada has literally written it into next year's financial plan to simply go in when the banks are on the edge of collapse from their own bad choices and crimes and corruptions. They'll just take the money of their depositors to make good on their obligations here. And now we're getting word that Italy's oldest bank, Montepaschi, has just bailed in their bondholders to the tune of $650 million. They're apparently going through this. They're halting all coupon payments on Tier 1 bondholders, effectively bailing in $650 million in bondholders' notes to recapitalize the bank. So our common sense advice to everybody listening to the show and reading our website is you should have no more in the bank than you need to cover your immediate obligations. You should have the rest at home under your own control. Even the safety deposit boxes aren't safe. And you should have part of that in silver and gold. And again, a nod to Republic Trading Group. You can go over there and get physical silver and physical gold at decent prices, and part of the proceeds from those sales goes to support Republic Broadcasting. Because we don't get big fat checks from Monsanto for some strange reason. We don't get big fat checks from big pharma or health insurance companies or shadowy government organizations. We rely on you, the listeners, to keep us going in this very, very difficult time here. Let's see. Remember that we were talking about that trucker strike next month? Going to shut down the United States in the middle of October. Apparently, Facebook just deleted their Facebook page. Just vanished completely. No warning. Another very weird story is apparently in New York City, the police are stopping people who have iPhones and handing them a leaflet saying to please upgrade to iOS 7. It's a public awareness notice for Apple users. You should update to iOS 7 because there's all kinds of cool features that you need to have. Now, as an aside, over the weekend, I updated my iTunes, and because my iPhone was plugged in, it proceeded to download and install iOS 7, and it promptly bricked my phone. So I spent a large part of Saturday doing a hard factory reset and doing a complete restore, which was not what I planned on doing with my Saturday. And frankly, now that I'm looking at iOS 7, it's got a few cool tricks to it, but not much else that recommends it. As we get into this whole debate over the food stamp program, we're seeing articles like over on RIF.com, should poor people eat? And I'm beginning to wonder about all these stories about, people on food stamp cards going in and buying de foie gras and steak and all these luxury items. And I certainly don't see it here. And because my wife and I are involved in a couple of food programs locally where we get to meet the people who are in need, I'm beginning to think that's part of the Republicans' propaganda, to put out these stories about how, people on these food stamp cards, they're eating steak while you, taxpayers who have to pay for the food stamps, you're on hamburger. Because I'm not seeing it. And it's getting a lot of coverage. And frankly, I'm beginning to think that's just another propaganda campaign to destroy sympathy for that segment of the American public who have most borne the brunt of Wall Street's crimes and corruptions. And where do we hear about all these abusers of the system? And I'm not saying there aren't abusers, but I haven't met any of them yet. The people that we deal with who are in need are genuinely in need, and they need the help. We hear about it on corporate media. We hear about it on controlled blogs that we know are tied in with various media corporations. And, of course, propaganda shills calling around and saying, I'm seeing these people. They're abusing the system. We should cut food stamp money. No, we shouldn't. Because there is no economic recovery until every American has recovered and has a job and a decent wage and a decent salary and a decent chance at having some kind of a life. We should cut the military spending. We should cut money to Israel. We should cut money for all this NSA spying on all of us, because none of it works for the American people. And I'm very disgusted with those members of our political establishment who see the American people as serving no other purpose than to breed new soldiers and new workers and to offer up all the wealth that they could ever desire. When they raise that debt ceiling, and I'm convinced they will, despite all the nattering and gromishing, they're going to raise it. They're just getting a new credit card. And they're going to go on getting new credit cards because they don't have to pay those credit card bills. You do, and your children do, and your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren, and your great-great-grandchildren. And despite this system having been around for 100 years, the one inescapable fact from the last 100 years, it doesn't matter how hard you work and how much you sacrifice, they'll simply go on borrowing more than you can ever pay back. Because it is the essence of the banking industry to keep us all, whether we are nations or individuals, slaves to debt. It's rule by banks, and it's no more legitimate a form of governance than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. The only legitimate governance is self-governance. And when the public currency is a privatized commodity, you've lost control over an essential part of your self-governance. You've lost your freedom to say no to being involved with the banks. By the way, speaking of the iPhone, Russian lawmakers are basically saying that they're not going to move to the new iPhone 5 until there's a guarantee that that little fingerprint scanner doesn't send the fingerprint off to someplace for nefarious purposes. And in any event, only 2 days after the release of the iPhone 5, that fingerprint sensor has already been successfully hacked. So, all right, we're going to head on out of here. We got some things to do this afternoon. We will be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. And again, one final time, please go to republicbroadcasting.org and hit that donate button. We are in a fight for the future of the Republic. We rely totally on you. Visit the sponsors at the website. Buy their products. We've got to keep this thing going. We're in a fight. The first one that quits is going to lose. And that's going to be a bad day for everybody. See you all tomorrow, and aloha, America.